Hi there. Heading to work, huh?
Gotta hurry.
Ever feel like you're a little too rushed?
Huh?
Or that your skills aren't being fully utilized?
Well, we all have to make sacrifices.
Sacrifices?
Yes, to the system, to our leaders.
Sir, do you know what a cult is?
It's a small group of people.
Not necessarily. Cults can be huge. There's no upper limit on their size.
I guess.
You might even be in a cult yourself.
Me? No.
But if you were, would you know it?
Of course. At least, I think so.
What about people who are born into a cult? Do they know?
Well, that's just sad. Someone should educate them.
Just imagine being born into a cult and nobody to tell you.
It's terrible.
And would they even want to know?
Oh, dear.
Just think of it.
The average citizen thinks, and they say to me, oh, no one could ever argue me into a cult. Say, cult recruiters don't argue people in. They are real soft soap, soft sell, convincing salespersons who lure you in, who cajole you in, who flatter you in.
Saying, how could anybody ever join a cult is like saying, how could anyone ever get in a toxic relationship? Nobody signed up to be in a toxic relationship. That's something that I think is missed a lot of times is, to me, the idea of cult is on a spectrum.
Right.
And it can shift. It's not until you can remove yourself from it just enough to look at it and be like, holy shit, that's not what I want.
Enlightenment, non-duality, all of this, then you're very likely to run into cults over the next 10 or 20 years of your self-development journey. There are a lot of cults that are built upon this information. This is very powerful information that can get very easily corrupted and abused by the ego. And so you can unwittingly get sucked into one of these cults, even though you don't intend to. Because generally speaking, we're not taught about how cults work in school, so we're all extremely susceptible. Even in university, they don't teach you how cults really work, unless maybe you take a very specific psychology course on that topic, which most people don't. And even then, it's not going to be very practical. It's going to be mostly theory. So we need to inoculate you against cults because these cults can destroy your life. They can suck you dry of your entire life savings and all of your possessions. They can abuse you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, even physically. They can lose you decades of your life. These are extremely dangerous and toxic ideologies, and they can be very, very appealing to people who don't know any better. But also it's important because someone close to you might join a cult, even if you don't. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to recognize those signs and to know what to do, to be able to give them advice, to know where to go find solutions? Of course, as soon as they get sucked in, they're going to try to suck you in, and they're going to try to suck in more of your friends and more of your family. You yourself could become a cult leader. And in fact, a lot of very intelligent people fall into this trap here, is they think that themselves as being too intelligent and too independent-minded to ever join a cult, but then they themselves go and start a cult.
One former cult leader he was more amazed at how easy it was to get people to obey. His experience of shock at how easy it was to con people, how easy it was to manipulate them, how easy it was to get them to give up their money to have sex with him or whoever he told them to. He was so amazed that he couldn't believe it, and he said what was so fascinating to him was that many of his followers were young adults and full-grown adults who had been very rebellious people. And here he found them so willing, once he had conned them with his smooth talk, his soft sell, his I'll love you forever, you're mine, we'll make this perfect new order, how easily he got them to obey and do anything. That was the thing that fascinated him the most.
It seems like this is information we should get to kids as young as we can.
Yeah.
So they can recognize these patterns that people fall into.
Absolutely. I've always thought that there should be a lesson in school about what is a human, what is the basic operating system manual for a human, and these are the mistakes that humans make. The truth is, it doesn't matter to human brains. What matters is what do I have to believe in order for people to like me and respect me.
Through education, we can provide young people, as well as adults and even the elderly, how to critically evaluate when someone approaches them and makes an offering to them that sounds just too good to be true.
Cults are everywhere. They don't look like they do in the movies, and we needed to get out.
A lot of us are susceptible to a lot sort of wackier and more esoteric beliefs than our current circumstances might have us believe.
The cult phenomenon is impacting on a large number of people in the world today.
Cults actually prey on those who are the most intelligent instead of least intelligent.
Cults can be started around any content. Cults can be started around any topic.
Highly intelligent and educated people who say they're committed to compassion and civilized conduct become vile to the people they've been told are the enemy. And when challenged on this, they cannot even go there. It's like it's filed away in some part of their brain they don't have access to. It doesn't just happen in a personal growth cult. It's everywhere.
A cult might say that you're watching this video because the universe brought you here, or that you are destined for this message and that you will be lost without it. Maybe it's true, but I'm not asking of you to follow me, to trust me. I want you to question everything. I want you to think for yourself. And I'm not saying these words just to gain your trust either, because I don't claim to have the answers. I'm just trying to figure out this world as much as you are, and I invite you to observe with me as we study the dynamics that make up our entire world and all the people and all the tricks, all the ideas that people come to grapple with in their day-to-day lives. This changed my world, and if it can change yours, we might just be able to change the entire world. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to directly show you the world that you live in. Again, you can make up your own mind, and you probably should. Let me cut to the chase and share with you why I'm making this video. You clicked this video because you want to escape the matrix, per se. In other words, you seek the truth. But the problem is, in a world like the one that we live in, how do you know what the truth is? How does one truly escape the matrix? There are several ways to do this, but one particularly effective way is to study mind control and cult psychology. And so by the end of this video, you will know how to avoid being mind controlled, or avoid being conned into any cult, whether mainstream or alternative. In other words, with this video, you will never fall back into the matrix ever again, because we may just be finding ourselves exposing literally everything until we find what is most essential. Simply put another way, when we know the rules to this reality, the laws that govern this reality, then you can steer and take control of your future. A powerful way we understand this reality is by knowing what it is not. This is also referred to as neti-neti or apophatic inquiry. So it is cults that we must study if we want to know who we truly are. Let us begin. But before we begin, because these cults may include you may not think of them as cults. I want you to be wary of that. And it's easy to attack the fringe cult groups, which are many, but there are many, many more. The ones that affect us the most, that affect everybody, the ones that people don't want to face. And so this video will have 4 main parts. 1, what is a cult? 2, the mainstream solution cults. Number 3, the alternative solution cults. And then number 4, how we can actually get out of it and see the bigger picture. Maybe recognizing also the biggest, most dangerous cults in our world today. And so everybody needs this information. If this were taught in schools, our world would be dramatically different in my view. And despite the fact that many cults want you to become enlightened and free, when we see these cult dynamics, I believe that we can become truly free and truly enlightened. So watch this video in full so you can see the bigger picture and finally become truly free and naturally yourself.
3 core elements together: the all-powerful charismatic leader who is worshipped by the followers in the group, and the use of thought reform, or what has been called coercive persuasion or brainwashing in popular culture. And then finally, that this undue influence that the leader has is used to exploit his or her followers. And you have the crucial elements of a destructive cult. The leader engenders dependency upon him to make value judgments for you. People begin to lose their sense of self. I would call it like a bait and switch con. You have no clue what you're really getting involved in, and they deliberately don't tell you. And you really do not make a choice based on informed consent for what you're getting pulled into. The person you trust, who probably is a true believer, who brought you in thinking that it was the best thing for you, they're also not going to be completely transparent about everything in the group. So you are brought in, and then it's a kind of spoon-feeding process of increments as you submerge deeper and deeper into the group. But you essentially become enveloped in a kind of echo chamber or bubble in which you are not getting accurate feedback. And instead, other members of the group are constantly reinforcing the group's beliefs and demands. Information is being controlled and feedback is being filtered, and you are not getting the true picture. And that's by design. There's this total intolerance for any type of critique, and that those who criticize the group are always wrong or even evil, and that there's no legitimate reason to leave. Are there people that have left your group? They're vilified. The same kind of problems happen over and over again.
Cults are groups where a leader or core belief system exerts a strong influence over every aspect of its members' lives. Charismatic leadership, unusual beliefs and practices, control and isolation. Many cults use strict rules and practices to control members. They often isolate individuals from family and friends and closely monitor daily life. This isolation helps the group maintain power over its members. Exploitation. In some cases, cults take advantage of their members financially, emotionally, or even sexually. High commitment. Members typically invest significant time, money, and personal energy into the group. B stands for behavior control. I stands for information control. T stands for thought control. Rituals, repetition, and the framing of dissent as dangerous or sinful are common tactics. E stands for emotional control. Cults exploit emotional vulnerabilities by fostering fear, guilt, or a sense of inadequacy. Leaders can make members feel dependent on the group for validation, support, and even identity.
It is a hierarchical organization created by a charismatic narcissistic leader which uses mind control techniques to amass money, power, and sex. So of course the devil will always think of himself as an angel, as the savior of mankind. That's what allows him to be so effective and so confident in his devilishness. Almost always the lieutenants that serve the leader of the cult are themselves very underdeveloped, immature, power-hungry, materialistic, fearful, and greedy, which makes them such good pawns to be manipulated into becoming lieutenants. And they become very loyal because they're also leeching and benefiting from this pyramid structure. Almost always the cult's mission is portrayed as benevolent in order to give a sense of divine purpose, a sense of confidence, direction, a sense of motivation. You will start to think of yourself when you join this cult as the savior of mankind and that you have a special place in history. It's like our cult has arisen right now at this perfect intersection within human history. The world and the environment is all collapsing, capitalism is collapsing, and right now this cult is like humanity's last chance to save itself. If you just join the cult and you just pay me some money and you buy into my ideology, then you will take this special place beside me in history. And you will go down in the history books as having helped awaken mankind.
Controlling the environment and narrative.
Is this a form of psychoanalysis?
No, psychoanalysis, they lay back. Don't associate Scientology with such people.
After many years and much money, those most deserving are saved.
I don't know other churches that demand to destroy people's lives if they leave and speak out publicly against it.
Challenging criticism.
We came from distant space, but your religious literature would call the kingdom of heaven, and we're about to return.
In retaliation, she says she is often followed and harassed. To further intimidate her, her house has been broken into.
You have to realize that when Jesus met his disciples, he said, You have to leave your family behind.
Fear of punishment.
The brainwashing was so effective, and of course the threat of violence, the constant threat of violence.
I just was so exhausted and I was in so much pain and I was so nauseous from the exercise that I went and vomited.
Induced dependency.
They had their own rooms, they had every need taken care of, they had their food provided, they were well looked after.
He said, if you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. As you see me as your father, I'll be your father. He said, if you see me as your God, I'll be your God.
Give a very fond embrace, a salutary kiss, a greeting to your neighbor. And let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Trance-inducing behavior.
I felt euphoric, higher than a kite in this meeting.
I felt like I sat in front of the equivalent of Jesus.
Selling a lifestyle.
Everybody's too nice, too kind, so full of shit. Something's not right. And she goes, really? What if it's you that's looking for that problem?
Regimented behavior.
When my kids left here, they were very thin and malnourished. I haven't seen them since they were taken to foster care. One lady told everyone that we were running out of time. There was no time to continue farming. It was time to fast, pray, and eventually meet Jesus.
Gaslighting.
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about lying?
Thought reform.
It's common for the person who is awakening for his life to begin to fall apart, or her life to begin to fall apart.
No regrets. It's been such an accelerated growth experience that no matter what happens, I could never regret taking this move.
Isolation.
They have their children speaking about their mothers and their fathers, and fathers talking against their children and not being able to talk to them.
You become in a perpetual state of denial of your own reasoning power.
Cult is a religion regarded as unorthodox. Or we have a secondary definition that says it can be a great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work. Religions or practices that have been around for a long time have more social capital. New religions may seem outlandish to some, but it's because it's new. Imagine if the story of Christ and the crucifixion happened now, today. It would likely be perceived the same way that some newer religions have been treated. Therefore, newer religions are quicker to be labeled as cult as opposed to religions that have been called religions for thousands of years. The more secret an organization is, the more likely people view it as potentially dangerous. Groups that either cost major money to join, demand regular payments, or ask members to give up all of their money and material goods altogether are often seen as predatory, assuming that this money is going into someone else's pocket. Now, most religions rely on donations and tithes to function, but I think the clear line here is demand. The members must leave their friends and family, either to relocate to a confined living space with other believers, or the group asks that they disassociate with friends and family, even if not physically moving away. They idolize a person, usually a charismatic leader.
And on the healthy to unhealthy continuum, what we're worried about are authoritarian mind control cults. They want people to be obedient, dependent, they use hate, they use fear. They're led by narcissistic, psychopathic people who are elitist and grandiose, power-hungry, secretive, deceptive, claim absolute, and in some cases divine authority, where there's focus on elitism, this authoritarian structure. They want to justify the ends, justify the means. They want to preserve their own power, and they are opposed to any facts that are contradictory to their claims.
A cult is a destructive relationship or system in which one party exerts power over another party through undue influence, resulting in harm to the party being controlled. One behavior from each of these four categories. So we want all four of these categories to be represented in some way. If any of these things are missing, then it is my opinion it's not a cult.
Because it's very hard for people to look at these lists and truly, without being emotionally vested, analyze their situation and say, yeah, I might be in a group like this. They will justify what they're doing and try to separate themselves from the pattern being exposed in the list. I know many people who stand for nonviolence and against coercion, and yet I see them being coercive towards other people. And then when questioned, they say things like, well, that's not coercion. This is for their own good or for the good of society at large. It's cognitive dissonance. When I was still in Nixium, one of the books Raniere recommended to a few of us was Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China by Robert J. Lifton. We were literally studying what he was doing to us, but we couldn't fathom the possibility. I highly recommend this book as it's a chilling study of what we're currently going through as a society. Milieu control, mystical manipulation, demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over person, and dispensing of existence. A cult is an organized group whose purpose is to dominate cult members through psychological manipulation and pressure strategies. Cults are usually headed by a powerful leader who isolates members from the rest of society. Pathology, love bombing. It could be a cult of one or a cult of millions. Obedience. So the follower, desperate for these promises of greatness, surrenders to the psychopath. In Raniere's case, he sold the idea that slavery is freedom. Yeah, right out of 1984. The follower, by the way, does not necessarily think that they're an obedient automaton. They truly believe they have a choice. So if you were to ask them, could they travel anywhere they want or associate with anyone they want, they might insist they can, but that's rarely the case. They do have some choices, within an extremely narrow band of options. Can they serve anything other than the agenda of the cult? Absolutely not. Can they choose what branch of activity to be involved with inside the cult? To some degree, yes. Infantilization, isolation, the mission. It's life and death, because if they don't succeed, humanity and civilization will fall. They need to save the world. Doctrine over person. The battle is so large and so important that you're just a small cog who must sacrifice everything. You're told that your humanity is flawed and lesser than this great ideology. Your humanity is weak. In fact, your humanity is the problem. Breaking boundaries, data mining, special knowledge, us versus them. You can bind a group very tightly by having them unify against a common enemy, even if it's completely fabricated and false. Accumulation of wealth at the expense of the followers. The leader will accumulate financial wealth, houses, cars, planes, expensive clothes, while the followers often live in abject poverty, struggling to put food on the table. The justification for this disparity is that the leader needs to be able to interact with the normal world at a very high level in order to change it, they say. Constantly busy. Responsibility with no authority. The cult leader can do any number of stupid, immoral, or criminal things, and they are not to blame for the consequences. This pattern erodes the self-esteem the followers might have had that they can create and affect change in their lives. Hopelessness sets in, and they just put one foot in front of the other, goalless and lacking in any ambition outside the confines of the cult. Redefining morality. They manipulate the members into accepting their moral code as the only valid one, and then they use this as a tool for control and manipulation. Cult members defend their new moral high ground by comparing it to societal corruption, which is unfortunately very easy to do. Coercion and control. There's always the prospect of punishment for stepping out of line. Examples will be made of people who question the narrative or defectors from the mission, and everybody knows it. Secrecy and lies. When a family asks a follower why the secrecy and lies, the follower will state that they're an open book. Ask me anything, they say, but their responses are often rehearsed talking points and circular word salad, spying on each other. The cult member will insist this is all about caring for others, a neighborhood watch of sorts. It's definitely not that. Confession. Triangulation. The followers are having all kinds of disputes with one another. Some of it is purposely instigated by the cult leader, keep them so distracted and exhausted that it wears them down. The other is to be the arbitrator and savior. They're so busy fighting that it camouflages what the leader or leaders are doing. Mystical science. Having these ideas as theories or musings is not the issue. It's when they get enforced as the one and only grand unified theory of existence that the trouble starts. Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. Any concern or objection the follower has is turned around on them. Gaslighting. You were talking to your ex again, weren't you? No, I wasn't. I can see the phone call log right here on your phone. First of all, why are you looking at my phone? And secondly, why do you always get unstable when I talk to other people? So you did call her. I didn't. I think you need help. You're beginning to imagine things. They're examining the event through their own filters and immature projection. Eventually, the followers no longer trust their own judgment and instincts. The recipient of this narrative might know it's a lie, but if that lie is repeated again and again, they begin to lose touch with actual reality, information control. The people who are on board with the narrative do not see any censorship. They're clueless. Because they believe the narrative so ardently, they never bump up against its boundaries. They have no idea why the fringe lunatics are causing trouble and being so dramatic. Just because the leader is labeling people with some terrible and scary word does not mean they're actually bad people. They may be trying to help you. It might be the very opposite of what you're being told to believe. The smear campaign. It can be hard to control the flow of all dangerous information, but what they can do is manage the image of the whistleblowers sharing that information. Any information that comes from this source is ignored, hated, and even ridiculed. It's usually vitally important information, but they're too far gone. They've become an unconscious mob. No matter how much you try to convince them that you're not this person, they cannot take it in. You are now Satan, and their abusive cult leader is God.
Cult refers most often to a group of people with usually atypical beliefs living in relative isolation from the world. People join cult movements for various reasons, most of which revolve around a desire for meaning and community. Many who become part of such organizations have troubled backgrounds and difficulty fitting in society.
A cult can form around anything: politics, religion, business, self-improvement, therapy, hate, aliens, meditation, YouTube channels, and eco-friendly lifestyle. It isn't their beliefs that make a cult, it's their authoritarian structure, their deceptive recruitment, and how controlling they are.
The energy that I felt from him put me into a state of almost fear and awe, because when somebody says and starts owning that he may be or kinda is a representative of the kingdom of heaven, there's kind of a energy that's exchanged between the two people. It's like there's a charge that goes on.
He was doing so much in the community, and so why not, rather than just tithe your 20%, why not sell your home, give the money to the church? And that is what people began to do.
Cults recruit everywhere. Lectures, seminars, retreats, going door to door. They run schools, businesses, political groups, meditation and yoga classes, weight loss programs, and therapy clinics. Hilariously, the Cult Awareness Network is also a Scientology front group.
You're constantly up, you're constantly busy, and you're made to feel guilty if you take too many luxuries like sleeping. You tend to not really think for yourself, and I did allow Jones to think for me.
Said all these horrible things about what would happen to me if I left because the world was such an evil place.
David Berg, head of the Children of God, was known as Dad or Grandpa. Elizabeth Clare, prophet of the Church Universal and Triumphant, was Mother. And Paul Pot, leader of the Khmer Rouge, was known as Brother Number 1.
I'd look around and I'd say, am I the only one that feels this way? I learned eventually not to say anything to anyone.
They teach that every single word of the ideology is completely true or none of it is. And joining the outside world is seen as a very dangerous idea. Many cults preach that anyone that leaves will probably die or be living on the streets in no time.
Is a relatively small group that excessively controls its members, who share a set of acts and practices which require unwavering devotion and are considered outside the norms of society. The group is typically led by a charismatic and often self-appointed leader, one that veers toward remolding individuality to conform to the codes and needs of the cult, institutes new taboos that preclude doubt and criticism, and produces a kind of splitting where cult members see themselves as an elite surrounded by unenlightened and even dangerous outsiders. Past historical events are retrospectively altered, wholly rewritten, or ignored to make them consistent with the doctrinal logic. All cults are political in the sense that they construct miniature totalitarian societies. Follow these 7 steps, and you'll have a fairly effective political cult. We need to be a lot more vigilant about the wolves in sheep's clothing than the wolves in plain sight. The figures and movements that talk the talk all the way to destruction. In 1974, 39-year-old Marlene Dixon took over the leadership of a group of 13 Maoist young women. She studied mass social psychology and group behavior modification, and after reading Robert J. Lifton's work on thought reform, she decided to implement his techniques in her organization. While Lifton saw thought reform as a dangerous brainwashing practice, Dixon picked it up and said, you know what, this is a useful and positive tool for remolding the world.
Which kind? Mao Zedong thought or Marxism, Leninism, Maoism?
Definitely Marxism, Leninism, Maoism.
Me too! Which party? People's Popular Progressive Revolutionary Democratic League for Labor Unity? Progressive People's Popular Front for Labor Unity? Or People's Revolutionary Democratic Vanguard Front for Labor Unity?
I'm with the People's Popular Progressive Revolutionary Democratic League for Labor Unity.
Then die, you petite bourgeois revisionist scum.
Scientific language may be used to create a veneer of objectivity and irrefutability, when true science requires an openness to flexibility and critical reevaluation. Cultic belief systems often claim absolute truth, rationalize their failures instead of challenging underlying assumptions, and draw hasty generalizations that oversimplify complex phenomena.
900 members of his People's Temple to drink poison Flavorade in 1978, in what came to be called the Jonestown Massacre.
Men have so dastardly distorted what my spirit is.
You can't go against that culture because going against that culture.
My father gave me long before this civilization.
If there's one thing that cult leaders do, it's talk. A lot. Speaking time had by far the highest correlation with leadership emergence, beating out intelligence, agreeableness, game proficiency, and even extroversion. If everyone else is listening to this guy, maybe I should too. Loaded language is a general term for words or phrases that have deep emotional associations for the listener, like genocide, patriot, toxic, or vermin. Cult leaders will craft their loaded language to have specific connotations. David Koresh used the phrase new light to cast his teachings as divine inspiration. Charles Manson repurposed the Beatles song lyric Helter Skelter to refer to an imminent race war. And Jim Jones borrowed the term revolutionary suicide from Black Panther activists to equate his plan for mass suicide with resistance to authoritarian state power. Just invoking a short phrase can instantly summon powerful feelings of beauty, love, fear, or hatred. It is what it is. Everything happens for a reason. Let's agree to disagree. They shut down argument and critical thinking, which is why they're so handy to authoritarians who don't like to be questioned. No sense makes sense. They didn't have the gift of recognition. It's out of our hands. Cult leaders' speech tends to be highly elaborative, using words like that, which, would, and because to create novel worlds full of complex rules and causality. Members of Heaven's Gate believed themselves to be evolved and next level, while outsiders were stuck on the human level. NXIVM labeled unbelievers suppressives, and Scientology uses the derogatory wogs to refer to non-Scientologists. And the jargon of Scientology can quite literally fill a 300-page dictionary, which members were forced to study for hours on end. Those that had been made to feel inferior were more likely to use jargon in their pitches. The researchers concluded that jargon can function as a kind of linguistic conspicuous consumption, advertising a higher status using words. Many ex-members of cults support this hypothesis, recollecting the early thrill of learning a mysterious terminology. Like kids sharing a secret code in a clubhouse, it made them feel part of an exclusive group which gave them a sense of superiority.
A system of religious veneration and devotion which espouses beliefs that are dangerous, especially to the lives, rights, and freedoms of those who are not its members.
It's a herd conformist group that is acting on behalf only of the group and has abandoned their own personal responsibility, their own responsibility to truth, their own responsibility to what is right. And they'll go along with whatever the group wants of them, whether it's right or wrong.
Nobody has any idea how the world works until they plug into a group. And the group has its stories that it tells about how the world works. Every group has its model of what a hero is, and this set of beliefs a hero has. And once we've plugged into that group, we orient ourselves towards becoming that person. The only difference between cult and a religion and a business and a political group is just that it's much tighter.
And when someone comes along and speaks confidently, I am never confident. I'm never confident about if you're so confident about all these thoughts and about what life is about and where we're going and what awaits us. And if you follow these rules, God, that's so confident. I'm not that confident. So I could get sucked in.
Yeah.
Any human could get sucked in.
Who do I have to be? What do I have to do? Tell me what I have to do in order to achieve connection and status. Human beings value status over their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how much we value status. We're the only animal that kills ourselves, which is just a weird thing in itself. An animal would voluntarily end its own life. And very often the reason that people kill themselves is because it's a sudden drop in status, or they feel completely isolated and alone. So they're lacking in those essential kind of psychological resources. They think they're doing something heroic.
Yes.
They think they're doing something amazing,
Yes.
as did the Nazis, as did the communists.
As does the KKK.
Yeah.
People, they can fall into belief structures, and they don't necessarily have to make sense. But if they find enough supportive people around them that also believe that, then it becomes part of their tribe identity.
Yeah.
And it can be really stupid. It can be really stupid. We're fucking way more vulnerable than we like to believe. That's one of the things that I was saying, like when I watched those cult documentaries. Part of me is like, thank God I didn't run into those people. Thank God.
Yeah.
They would have got me.
And when they look at the psychology of people that are vulnerable to falling into cults, it's very often people that have struggled to fit into the status games of ordinary life.
Yeah.
So they've got, the family hasn't worked, the job hasn't worked, the hobbies haven't worked. So they've got no identity, they've got no tribe. So they're really vulnerable to these cults, because what cults offer is absolute certainty.
Yeah.
If you cook your scrambled eggs this way, if you only put 2 inches of water in your bath, they don't consider themselves brainwashed. They consider themselves, well, they're just in a status game.
Yeah.
Like any other status game. It's just a very, very strict one.
They're typically significantly better educated than the average person. Usually young adults with weak religious backgrounds, their top motivations for joining, according to one study, were spirituality, personal development, and life dissatisfaction. A scholar, Lauren Dawson, notes, being converted to a cult requires flexible thinking and diligence, noting that the processes of being indoctrinated demand literate intelligence, a willingness to study, and a lack of fear in the face of unfamiliar concepts and language. That's how I felt when I first started taking improv classes, and like $15,000 later, here I am. Society's attraction to so-called cults tends to thrive during periods of broader existential questioning. Most alternative religious leaders come to power not to exploit their followers, but instead to guide them through social and political turbulence. It's helpful to think of the re-enchantment of some aspects of life as an active rebellion against the disenchantment we experience on a daily basis.
So as you can tell, there's quite a lot to unpack there, and we have a whole world yet to unpack in this video, so I hope you stay tuned because I want to share with you my favorite video detailing the nature of cults, because we need to have this really solid foundation before we move forward and start calling this a cult and that a cult, or really just understanding the underlying dynamics, the patterns, the behaviors, the thought patterns that take place that contribute to such mass casualty as we've seen throughout history with totalitarian regimes to oppressive cults where they convince people to hurt themselves. I mean, it's crazy stuff. So check this out.
It's more a cultic relationship in which you, the follower, turn over your decision-making to this person and you surrender and obey in return for them sharing with you their supposed secrets. They tend to have a rule that covers everything. They tend to be totalitarian in that the cult leader has all of the power and decision-making. Most of the modern-day cults have a double set of ethics. As a member, you're to tell the truth to the other people in the group, but because the outside world are regarded as lesser beings, sinners, unenlightened, they can be lied to and tricked. They are elitists. They believe that all the members are special persons and above others in the world, so that makes it all right for the double set of ethics. Most cultic groups differ from altruistic and educational groups in our society because the primary purpose of cultic groups is to gather more members and to gather more power and money for the cult leaders, so that it's primarily the promotion of the cult leader rather than the growth and development of the followers. People don't realize what the bottom line is going to be, what joining the group is going to entail across time. The cult leader grows wealthier and more powerful while trying to convey to the followers that he is helping them. There are some venal people, meaning self-serving, manipulative people, who realize how the big cults are able to manipulate people, and venal people with enough charisma to get a following start their own little closed, intense cultic group. Thought Reform program merely puts into place ways to get you to put your old value system aside and make your decisions based on what you know the cult leader wants and will reward. But you're still making decisions, but you're making them in the context of what will keep you from getting in trouble and what will get you rewards within the cult. But brainwashing doesn't make a zombie. You don't have to lock them up. You don't hold a gun at the head. In fact, just the opposite. A smiling big brother effect is far more effective. The most powerful influence program, the biggest deception, are put into place through smiling, soft sell technique, and not gun at the head and not imprisoning people. It looks like what is going on, but the idea behind it is to change your behavior so that you will carry out what management wants done for their goal. And they have no idea that the major cult is really what they're going to under another name. Step at a time, getting moved along toward being exposed to a very organized recruiting program once you get to the cult facility. In between meaningful jobs, meaningful relationships, we're all vulnerable to flattery and false promises. It's not any special type of person that gets in a cult, but it's people who are approached by a cult recruiter at a vulnerable period in their life. Anyone that's trusting and open and goes along with an offering made by a stranger has made that first almost fatal step of opening themselves up to further cult inducement and recruiting. I know of no cult who warn members that anything the cult does may not be good for the followers, because most people, if they had full information about what the bottom line of joining the cult was going to read, many of them would never join. They told me afterwards, had they known, they would have never joined. But because there was so much deception, they went along. Then pretty soon they were so dependent on the cult, there was no place, no thing to go back to. You need to get a hold of a good deal of the person's time, and especially their thinking time. Most cults keep people very, very busy. You don't judge whether it's a cult or not as to whether you live in or live out. Most trance induction that's used by various cults then utilizes guided imagery in which the speaker appears to be telling a parable, repeating a verse over and over again, telling a story of his childhood in a soothing, rhythmic way. It gets your attention and my attention highly, highly focused. So we don't have critical thoughts, we don't judge what we're doing. We just trust the person that's giving the visual imagery and the relationship, and it makes us much more malleable and suggestible in that state. While you're watching this video, you're asking questions and saying, I wonder if she means, I wonder if she's going to get to. If you were being tranced out, that kind of questioning, thinking gets put aside, and you're just listening to the voice and the image, and then what the words say to you, you're much more likely to incorporate into your thinking. Many cults use forms of mantra or empty mind meditation for many, many years, many, many hours a day. The people have really lost the ability to not have meditation intrude into their volitional behavior. And when there are natural disasters, almost every cult reframes, meaning puts a label on that, to make his message more believable and more frightening if you don't obey and do what he says you should do. Because who wants a flood, a hurricane, an earthquake? And cult leaders almost always say that if you follow their rules, it will help change the world and make it perfect, and especially to make it seem as if he has magic. Many cults use chanting, speaking in tongues. Cult leaders are able to induce guilt in their followers by almost any means possible. If you think your mother and dad or your aunt or your uncle or your grade school teachers were good at making you feel guilty, Cult leaders do differently than our parents and the teachers. They take the power of the whole group and turn it against the person that they're putting on the hot seat and making them feel guilty. It's very rare that, in a schoolroom that the teacher gets the whole class pointing and chanting, sinner, sinner, sinner. You get to feeling guilty for even thinking thoughts that would get you in trouble with the cult leader. So the more and more you're made to feel anxious and guilty, the more and more you suppress any critical ideas toward the cult or the leader. Every cult practically is an us against them. Most people watching this film will not realize the heady power that cult leaders have of having people just pay attention to them. It must be a heady feeling. And so in order to maintain that relationship, the cult leaders have to denigrate the outside world, put it down, make it seem unsafe. Often cult leaders tell members that if they leave the group, they will die of cancer, that their mothers, fathers, relatives will have terrible disasters happen to them. They tell them they'll never get to heaven, that they'll never be able to get their karma handled. They have all kinds of ways of making the outside world seem like something that one shouldn't affiliate with. You will stop exhibiting a lot of your behavior that you brought to the cult because they want to change you to a way they want you to appear. Cults often change members' names. This is a way of taking your old identity away from you almost without exception. Each cult develops its own lingo, its own jargon, because they have to speak two Englishes. The English that's used in their cult, in which language is used in a very different way than in the outside world, and then having to almost translate their thoughts after they've been speaking cult jargon for a long time into everyday English. Break up all that thinking that went with what you were asked and reformulate what you're supposed to say. If you and I were in a cult, we would be talking abstractions and jargon that doesn't always have real visualizable images and pictures, and yet we'd have to act as if we really understood each other. We think we should be able to follow what someone says, and it's our fault if we don't. So we sort of turn inwardly. And in a way, if we're the least bit prone to trance induction, we're actually assisting the cult leader in our own trance induction by turning inwardly and seeking the meaning, trying to put more meaning into these abstract phrases. He will describe the entire outer world as not pious, or as satanic, or as unenlightened. And it's part of stopping reflective thinking, meaning he doesn't want them to think about what are they doing here giving their life to him. What are they doing giving their money, obeying, letting him beat their kids, have sex with their daughters. He doesn't want them doing that kind of reflective thought. So that the more that leaders speak in globalities, the more they keep you from thinking critically. And then pretty soon you're almost trained like a pet dog. He speaks of Satan and everybody knows you're supposed to think the outside world is bad because the leader just used that charged word. Cults use denigration and ridicule and humiliation as a control mechanism. It has become your new family. And you're going to keep working, trying to get in his graces and try to get some praise from the other people, so that in a rather harmful way it's used as a motivator. It's used to show the leader is so pure, so above it all, so powerful, and you are this lowly follower. Most cults make use of confession to get information that will then be turned around to manipulate. And it's also getting the person, after a while, to confess to things, to say they want to be more like the group. They want to get in with the group so that they're purging themselves in order to merge with the group. Certain groups give great praise for people getting up and confessing and breaking into tears and breaking down. And remember, the behavior learned in cults will wither if you're away from the cult long enough, because it is a superimposed identity. It is a pseudo-identity. It is a pseudo-personality. What the cult leader in certain cults does is he wants to show newcomers that these people were such sinners, such awful people, drug users, just the worst criminals, that people that were just plain ordinary folks like the rest of us, just regular folks with no criminal record, no drug, no nothing, will get up and confess to histories that make them seem just like hideous people that have been saved by this group. Parents will have seen their kids beaten. They will have been instructed to lie and do things in which they have carried out conduct that was so against their conscience, but pretty soon they were totally desensitized to it. The street recruiters who raise money under false pretenses, for example, telling people on the street they're raising money for a drug rehab center, and they know the cult doesn't have a drug rehab center. They've been conditioned by the leader to think that it's all right to lie to these outsiders. They'll call them systemites, Babylonians, sinners. The cult leader will have taught them that they are the elite, and these outsiders can be, lied to because they're lesser beings, and that they're just restoring to God what's His. When they begin to think about it and finally leave, many of these people tell me about just unending guilt that they have about lying to people and getting so puzzled at how could they have put their conscience on deep freeze like they did. You can't complain to management. You just acquiesce. It is a closed system in which management's always right, you're wrong. On the whole, keep just pushing the prophecy farther ahead in time and blaming the followers, saying the prophecy didn't come true because you followers have not been doing your chores right. You haven't been meditating right, you haven't been praying right and enough. You have to do more and better. And that it's your fault, not the cult leader's prophecy that was wrong. You folks caused it. And they just moved the prophecy date forward. Many therapists do say, skip all of that. I want to hear only about your childhood. That's when your personality was formed. Personality can be changed and altered in adulthood, and that's what one sees.
Now that we have a grasp on the word cult, wait a second. There's a lot of people who say that we don't really even know what a cult is because there isn't an agreed upon definition, or that people are misusing it and it's not properly defined.
When you ask what a cult is, it's almost like you have to give this myriad of definitions.
There is no agreed upon definition of a cult.
The term cult can be controversial. Some scholars and experts prefer the term New Religious Movement, NRM, when describing groups with unconventional beliefs. Not every group with unconventional beliefs is dangerous or harmful.
If a group has weird beliefs, so what? It's none of my business. It's only when the group is doing something that is destructive.
Okay, so we need to understand what is destructive, what causes harm, or maybe looking at all the patterns among all the researchers and the people who have personally dealt with cults or have deprogrammed other people out of their cults. Well, one notorious researcher is Rick Ross. We've already shared several clips from him, one which you just saw. And in this interview with Alex O'Connor as the host, he actually asks very good questions, even saying that people can get rather confused and that it seems to kind of be on a scale or spectrum.
When it comes to philosophy, theology, sociology, terms are very difficult to define, right? Religion, cult. Words like these are impossible to define precisely. But I think people would generally think that a cult involves things like resistance to anybody trying to leave. You've got your sort of charismatic leader, but there also seems to be this insular and isolated nature to that community. And I know that a lot of people in the anti-cult movement make a distinction between so-called benign cults, ones that aren't so bad, and so-called destructive cults, which are the bad ones. And if it is that the kind of the typically bad stuff, not allowing people to leave and stuff like that, isn't intrinsic to being a cult, I think people might be a little confused about what a cult could be then. You know, when somebody gets up and says that they're a socialist, they say, oh, you've been brainwashed by the woke media and you're not thinking straight. And again, it's kind of hard to judge because it's on such a sort of broad scale.
I find Satanists, Wiccans, witches, Santeria and so forth to be relatively benign. And though the beliefs are strange to the mainstream, that doesn't make them a destructive cult. Likewise, there could be a kind of philosophical group or a political group that we don't agree with, that we should not label a cult simply because we don't agree with them. For example, I would not call the so-called woke movement a cult any more than I would call Donald Trump a cult leader.
One thing contributing to this confusion is the idea of calling something a cult, but saying that there's also a destructive cult. And in the course of this interview, he's using these terms interchangeably. Sometimes he calls something a cult, and other times he calls something a destructive cult. And so it's like, which one are we talking about here sometimes? So okay, we have examples, but the problem is that another leading cult researcher who, if you do a basic search, you're going to get Rick Ross, but you're also going to get Stephen Hassan. And the title of one of his books is The Cult of Trump. So I'm not trying to sow division. I'm not trying to be political here. I'm talking about everything in our society. But why is it that two of the leading cult experts in this world disagree on one of the most powerful or influential people in our world?
I got interested in this whole field because of my own recruitment into a right-wing fascist cult in the 70s. Fortunately, I was deprogrammed after a near-fatal van crash due to sleep exhaustion. Not just use the word cult, but use it intelligently. And it, in fact, is a defensible paradigm to describe what's happening in the Trump administration and all the people who are just blindly believing in him versus facts, documents, testimonials from patriots. And at the point that I was fasting for Richard Nixon during his Watergate problems, because Moon said God told us that God wants Nixon to be president. When I woke up from my deprogramming, I was so embarrassed. How could I believe that nonsense?
So Alex even challenges Rick a little bit on this issue, and here is Rick's response about Trump not being a cult leader.
Trump comes across as very narcissistic and self-indulgent and, and so on, which makes him disagreeable to some people, but it doesn't make him a cult leader. I mean, there are many movie stars, actors, celebrities who are very narcissistic, who have a kind of posse or entourage that follows them, that agrees with whatever they say, that are sycophants. But that doesn't make it a cult. And what I think Donald Trump is more of a vessel than he is a cult leader. He gives voice to their grievances, their sentiments, their fears in a way that that has engendered their support. And if you look at Donald Trump's history, I see him more as a salesman. He understands what they want to hear, and he speaks to their deepest held feelings. And I don't think that the people that support him suddenly change their feelings or their political attitudes or their grievances, but rather it just flowed through him. And in that sense, he is more beholding to them than they are to him. He did a rally in Alabama at one point, and Trump said, what about that vaccination? Wasn't that great? I hope all of you are vaccinated. And he started getting booed. And in my experience, cult leaders are not booed. Cult followers are not allowed that privilege to boo or show discontent in that way. And instead of Trump denouncing them and saying, take all of these negative people out of here, he changed and walked back what he was saying and morphed it into an issue of, well, if you don't want to take the vaccine, you shouldn't have to be forced to take the vaccine. The vaccine should not be mandated. And then the audience started to clap and then cheer. And if you watch Trump in many of these interactions at his rallies, he's playing to the crowd. He's playing to the audience. It isn't like the audience is simply obedient and subservient to him.
What I find interesting about this is he says Trump is a vessel and that he's a salesman, is that Margaret Singer, who is also one of the top cult experts, who actually shared notes directly with Rick, said that cults are actually very effective salesmen.
Salespersons who lure you in, who cajole you in, who flatter you in.
And speaking to what people want to hear, appealing to people, that's exactly what, from what I see, every politician does. It makes people more servile, more likely to go along with it. That's what makes cults so deceptive. I mean, he will even talk about how there's this alluringness that causes people to become more obedient, to fall more in line. So it's like, thank goodness we don't need permission to boo, but we don't have permission to not have Trump as this leader over our own lives. People are beholden to him as president. Do they have a choice out of that scenario? And in many cases, how is law carried out? We can say it's through the use of violence. We know that when someone is obedient and just following orders, they're suppressing their conscience in the same way when someone's part of a cult. So maybe it is more destructive than we think. Maybe it can be more deceiving than we think. And these are just questions. And this is also a challenge for Alex O'Connor, who was challenging Rick, and I don't expect him to challenge him a whole lot. But these are some rather interesting peculiarities which I feel like are not being addressed. Anyways, here's more.
For example, people didn't say Heil Germany. They said Heil Hitler. And they saw Hitler as a messianic figure. In the same way, we now have North Korea, which has had 3 successive generations of leaders from the same family who are worshipped as semi-divine, as virtually supernatural. And they can be seen likewise as cult leaders.
When we're talking about cult leadership of the kind that you're describing, it is a different level of worship and personality and authority and certainty, I think.
I think the important thing the takeaway is, does the group hurt people?
So, okay, we might say a political regime that isn't as tyrannical or as much as a dictatorship as other ones are not a cult, or are lesser of a cult, or are benign as a cult. But we still have to ask the questions, how does it get to that point where it is no longer benign? How does that become permissible where people are all of a sudden going along with it? Not to mention that he says that there's this similar bloodline in North Korea. Well, that's also been observed here in America.
11-year-old Bridget Dovigneau says she's made a first-of-its-kind discovery, that President Obama and all the presidents before him, with the exception of one, are related and descendants of a former king of England.
No, they are all cousins,
Oh, I
and
see.
they're grandsons of John Lachlan.
It also seems like America, as opposed to Trump, the figurehead, can also be a form of worship. And in fact, these two identities tend to go together. And would we not say that people begging and praying on their knees and crying, looking up to Trump as some sort of idol, is a form of worship to change the world for them? We see it in every single rally. Are we really dealing with just another celebrity and another businessman? Not to mention, but the paper that we call law, or the positions of authority, this can often be seen as a sort of deity-like worship. Not to mention, but if you go back in history, this divine right to rule existed among a lot of, I'd say most of the ancient empires, many that you can see out there, including Sumeria, the very first government. So would that make them all cults? Are there any inherent dangers within the power systems that be? Maybe the whole structure itself can be challenged, like how we went from monarchy to democracy. And maybe Stephen Hassan's model is still incomplete, because maybe he's criticizing Trump when it's also happening with other people as well. So as you can tell, there's quite a bit of confusion as to what is a cult, And discussing these matters, like politics or religion, we will discuss further down the road. But there's actually a great researcher that I want to emphasize, and her name is Amanda Montell. She's a linguist. She focuses on language, and she is delivering the case that the reason why all this confusion exists is because we don't necessarily understand language. And by understanding language, we have this key ingredient to understanding what a cult truly is.
I've read a lot from Stephen Hassan and, so many like him, like obviously also survivors like Sarah Edmondson or Leah Remini. And reading your book was interesting because you are focused specifically on language. Like that is the subheading of your book, is it's the language of fanaticism. And I realized very quickly, like language isn't just one part of how cults operate. It's kind of foundational to how they gain any traction whatsoever.
In our culture, where we're increasingly moving away from these mainstream institutions like traditional church and government and healthcare, we're losing our trust in some of these institutions that are supposed to provide us with support, community, connection. So we're looking to alternative groups, from influencers to cult fitness brands, to fill those voids. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we tend to think of cults as sinister by definition. If you look at the fascinating etymology of this word, that doesn't tend to be the case. So I like to think of these groups along a cultish spectrum. Trickily, there is no hard and fast definition for what makes something a destructive cult. Scholars have tried to come up with a list of criteria that definitively distinguishes a cult from a religion, from another kind of social group, and they've never been able to agree. And for this reason, the word cult has become so subjective and so sensationalized that a lot of experts don't even use it, at least not formally. They tend to get more specific, talking about fringe religions, alternative religions, if that is what they're talking about. Otherwise, it can be helpful to hedge, talk about cult-like groups or cultish groups. Certainly nobody likes to be told that they're in a cult. The algorithm is the ultimate cult leader. The algorithm on social media will send us down rabbit holes, encouraging us to believe only more and more extreme versions of what we already do. And that's why you see the formation of so many of these cultish groups online. We think of cults as these groups that exist on, remote compounds somewhere where everybody's dancing around in flower crowns, but they can really form to various degrees on the internet, with language as the ultimate power tool. It's wildly taken for granted because language is invisible and seemingly commitment-free. We grow up with axioms like sticks and stones will break your bones, but words can never hurt you. And that causes us really to overlook the true material power of language to influence our worldview, to encourage conformity and shut down independent thinking, to coerce, to condition, all of the things that a cult really needs in order to gain and maintain power. In a lot of the cult documentaries, mostly, that you'll watch, or cult media coverage that you'll find, they don't tend to give very satisfying explanations for what causes people to wind up spending years and years and years in these really destructive groups. It's all just this vague talk of brainwashing and mind control. And in order to manipulate people like that, you need these methods of conversion and conditioning and coercion that have everything to do with language. Cultish influence shows up everywhere, and the proof is in the way that we speak. We tend to think of cult leaders like Jim Jones or Marshall Applewhite as these evil geniuses, these like great masterminds. But really, they're mostly just opportunists, and they're following power wherever it comes, however quickly it comes. They don't necessarily have a set ideology or brand in mind when they start out. And that's one of the main reasons why so many of these groups will constantly reinvent themselves, and why the ideology will change, because the leader is just, doing whatever is convenient and whatever will grant them the most power. There are a lot of ingrained reasoning flaws that in a way do our own brainwashing for us. Prevailing wisdom says that people who wind up in cults are desperate, intellectually deficient, disturbed in some way. But why would a cult want someone like that?
Right.
Cults want winners. They want people of privilege with time and money and connections to spend, to burn. They want people who have enough idealism and enthusiasm and resources so that when inevitably the lofty promises that were made don't come true, they're not just gonna get the hell out of Dodge. The number one fatal flaw I found talking to cult survivor after cult survivor was exactly what you're talking about, this sense of idealism, this overabundance of optimism that they could be part of this hope for mankind, which is what all of these groups promise.
I want to say thank you, Amanda Montell, for such a nuanced perspective and being able to talk about everything in our world. And I want to thank all the previous researchers as well. But we have to understand what's at play here. This term she uses for her book, fanaticism, and using language as a tool for communication that can be very deceptive. She's looking much deeper and much bigger pictured than perhaps other researchers are. And she says that cult leaders are opportunists. So I see a great emphasis here then on fanaticism, on how we deal with the concepts, with the ideas that come to us. And then because they are coming to us, we have to know how we respond. We give these systems power, whether it's by our money or by our time, by our attention, and we do our own brainwashing. We deceive ourselves and we start to deceive other people with us. So with this laid foundation, what is more about fanaticism?
Everyone thinks the other guy's the fanatic and they're rational and reasonable. And how could people not see it their way? The problem is, the last person to recognize we become a fanatic is ourselves. The other problem is, a fanatic typically drives away and doesn't want to have anyone in their life who would tell them they have a problem with fanaticism. We get absolutely obsessed and focused on that one thing, that one subject, that one cause, to our own destruction. And we can't see the realities that would check us and bring us back from the cliff. They become a one-note Charlie. They become a drum beater. They 24/7, they're beating that drum. They just can't seem to change the subject. When a person's a fanatic, they're irrational and unrealistic in losing touch with reality. And they're absolutely convinced this one thing is the answer. This one issue trumps everything else. They start believing more and more incredible, less believable claims that their fanatical belief system starts claiming, because this thing explains everything. Race relations explains everything. Psychology explains everything. Social justice explains everything. Getting back to a former time is the answer. It explains everything. And so what happens is they just get consumed. They start consuming news and media and things, social media. It's like all the time, always on. We start getting rid of voices and relationships of people who tell us other things, who don't agree in every point, who would challenge our beliefs. They've got to make this happen or the world ends. We're dealing with the subjects the fanatics are talking about. We're not addressing the fanaticism underneath their unholy passion and obsessions about those things. Just let it be there. Get them to start thinking. Disrupt that have an answer for everything, don't think, just spiel. But if this had happened to you, could you tell? Don't assume fanaticism is not inside the church. It is.
And see, that last part represents a self-awareness of, wait, I am perhaps a religious individual, but I understand where there is fanaticism, or I understand if it becomes cult-like or cultish, as the book says by Amanda. But here, I want you to listen to a very poetic, very meaningful description of what fanaticism is.
I do not ask what the world is coming to, or what is the right way to go. I ask myself, what if I were he? What if I were she? What would I feel, want, fear, and hope? What would I be so ashamed of that I'd hope no one will ever know about me? My job is to put myself in other people's shoes, or even under their skins. My driving force is curiosity. I was a curious child. Almost every child is curious, but few people bring their full curiosity into adulthood and old age. Now we all know that curiosity is a necessary condition, even the first condition for every intellectual or scientific work. But I want to add that in my view, curiosity is also a moral virtue. A curious person is a slightly better person, better parent, better partner, neighbor, colleague, than a person who is not curious. Let me suggest that curiosity, alongside humor, are two powerful antidotes to fanaticism. Humor undermines fanaticism. Curiosity assaults fanaticism by introducing the risk of adventure, questioning, and sometimes even finding that your own answers might be wrong. The defining feature of good literature and art, in my view, is its ability to open a third eye in our forehead, to make us see shabby old things in a wholly new way. It tells us something we did not know about ourselves and about others, or something that we did not want to know.
So learning what you may not want to learn, looking at what you may not want to look at, that's what this video is all about. Seeing all the different cults that are around us, and seeing if they may have different elements of a cult. Not that we have to say they are a cult, or seeing the specific actions and being able to discern and know our place even if we are engaged in some sort of organization or product or service. This is the type of nuance that I want to share with you as we move forward. But I also want to understand the concept of identity, because notice here in the first clip, Joe Rogan says, well, if they would just let me be me, then I'm okay with being in a cult. What if this is part of the deception where we think we are in touch with our conscience and who we are, but then push comes to shove and we realize, wait, we really aren't, and that these systems are maybe changing us? And why would we need permission to be ourselves?
Yeah, a lot of these Scientologists are doing really well in Hollywood. Like, maybe that's a good cult to join.
Yeah.
Maybe if they just let me be me.
Actors were particularly susceptible to Scientology because they've got this weird... They don't really have an identity, actors. They were always sort of slipping into different people's identities. I thought that was an interesting,
especially if you're
kind
really
of theory.
good. Yeah. You probably lose who the fuck you are.
Yeah.
Who am I? Am I Rocky? Am I the Mission Impossible guy?
Yeah. Well, when they're walking around, everybody treats them that way. But in this day and age, in these huge groups in which we belong to, it's much harder to feel relative status because you're competing with millions of people, especially online. And I think that's a source of a huge amount of sort of misery in the modern world, a stress, sort of I call it an identity anxiety, identity stress. We feel really unsatisfied with the amount of connection and status that we have because we exist in these fucking massive international tribes now.
Can you work with other people? Absolutely. But to identify with that group is something altogether different. That means you're taking your identity from it, and you're not a unique individual anymore. You've been dissolved into the group. And a group really doesn't truly have a conscience. Only people, only individual people have a conscience. Once you're involved in a group, the group has its own direction that it wants to go. That's all about preservation of the whole, preservation of the group and its directives, its agenda. That isn't to say that there's no such thing as a group of people that can accomplish good aims. That is certainly the case. That is possible. But that only happens when the people in the group continue to see themselves as unique individuals working toward a specific goal that they know to be correct, they know to be right, and they're not identifying with the group and its preservation. And unfortunately, this is what all of our institutions in the world today are all about.
So we'll explore the nature of identity later, as this seems to be also important. Group behavioral mentality and psychology in general. Seems like there's so many avenues you can go with this. But for now, let's look at maybe some of the solutions of what do we do if we are in a cult? How do we deprogram? How do we escape?
Most people will leave cults on their own, not through an intervention. And typically it will be something shocked them. They saw something happen in the group that caused them to be shocked, to feel, I can't handle this. This is too terrible. I need to leave. Or they're exhausted. But then, because of their indoctrination in the group, they may feel that this is something that they should be ashamed of, that I should have been stronger. I should have been able to work 60 hours a week. Why couldn't I just keep doing that? I should have been able to not be in touch with my family. Why did I feel so homesick? It was a weakness that I loved my family. I should have put God first, meaning the group, because in the mind of the individual, a higher power, a higher purpose is fused with the group in the sense that you feel that you're not deferring to the leader, you're deferring to God, you're deferring to a higher order, a higher principle. What happens in an intervention is basically education and sharing information, defining what is a destructive cult, what is coercive persuasion, what is thought reform, what history of the group do you not know that you should know to make a more informed decision about continuing with this group? Are they withholding information from you? Do they have secrets that they don't want you to know? Why aren't they telling you their history? Why did your family decide to do an intervention? About 30% of the people that I work with at the end will say, I want to go back to the group. I'm happy there. That's what I want to do. Or they're in touch with someone in the group and they tell them, hey, get out of there. We don't want you to talk about these things with anyone. Come back to us. Ignore your family. Ignore their concern.
The way to wake up is through information and conscience and critical thinking.
I acknowledge that I might be at risk of falling for some of these fallacies, even though I really try to avoid them. It's very easy to see what we want to see, what our theory tells us to see, what we think ought to be there, rather than what is. Too often I see people learning or being radicalized just up to a certain point, but then not challenging themselves and pushing further to question new orthodoxies. I see this as a necessary challenge to be more rigorous, though not necessarily more rigid, in learning and exploring the ideas of others while developing my own. There's the social buffer, which is all about learning what healthy social boundaries are and developing relationships within those boundaries. The esteem buffer is about recognizing that you and every other person on this planet are owed a baseline of respect. The relaxation buffer refers to ensuring you take time exclusively for yourself to rest and recuperate so that you don't get caught up in the flurry of cult activity. And there's the bubble pop buffer, which is about making sure to learn from multiple sources, even ones you don't agree with fully.
Don't give them ammunition to believe that you are the enemy by attacking them. Stay interested in their perspective, and above all, be loving and kind. One day, they might compare what they're told is love in the cult to the actual love you're giving them, and realize they prefer your unconditional kindness to the fear and punishment they're experiencing.
Using verbiage like, I don't like that you distance yourself from family, or it doesn't seem right that you have to pay so much money for this, might be more effective than you're in a cult.
When given personality tests, some of history's finest minds, including Carl Sagan, scored off the charts in both conscientiousness and open-mindedness.
And what we would like you to agree to is to just give us the time, and then you will do whatever it is that you want to do, and we will respect that. But we would like the time to talk with you about why we're worried, why we're concerned. And usually, most of the people will say, okay, fine. I don't think it's necessary. I think this group I'm in is great. Everything is wonderful. Some of the people will say, hey, this is maybe an opportunity for me to explain to you why you should get involved in this group. Yeah. And how it could help you. And the family will typically respond by saying, great, then we can have an exchange of ideas and discussion. The crucial difference with a drug or alcohol intervention is that in those interventions, the liquor store owner or the drug dealer are not trying to sabotage the intervention.
Yeah.
It could be a life or death situation. I've been involved in interventions where the group said, don't take your insulin. Don't take this medication that you take to avoid convulsions. And then the person could die as a result of the cult's influence. People are born into and grow up in groups called cults, where what we consider crazy and abnormal to them is everyday life, and that abuse is the norm, and harsh corporal punishment, sexual exploitation, labor violations, working kids, I mean, these are the kind of things that go on.
Listen, I think you're in a cult and you need to get out. Where did they go wrong?
They're too harsh. They're too judgy. They haven't figured out the best approach, which is to be calm, to be conciliatory, to say, you know, well, what's going on with this group? Talk to me about it or whatever. To not be threatening or confrontational or critical or negative, and to just be open and to be a good listener.
It's about being able to tap in and tap out. Like you need to be able to return at the end of the hour or day or whatever it is to an identity that is more complex than this one ideology, this one group, this one guru. And if you're not able to do that, then that's a red flag. Like you need to be able to strip off that linguistic uniform at a point. And if, you know, the language that you're using all day, every day causes you to, you know, morally divorce yourself from some one-dimensionally inferior other, causes you to, you know, have a strong emotional response, but stop asking questions. That's a sign that, you know, that type of language is worth questioning. And it's hard because it feels really good to speak, you know, a special code language that makes you feel like you're doing something right in the world. But at the end of the day, it's probably better to be a member of multiple different cults and participate casually and to make room in your brain for nuance, because that's really where the protection of your identity really exists.
Our sense of self, our identity, it needs to be flexible, not fragile. We need an identity that is resilient. The best way for me to describe this is using a rubber band. And maybe some of you have heard this analogy, where the band represents our ability to stretch under pressure and bounce back again. But I have a problem with this analogy. I don't think these things are resilient at all. Just look at it. It's so flimsy. If this is meant to represent me, I mean, sure, I might be resilient at first as I learn new things and take on new forms, but over time, rubber becomes rigid. And the more I'm stretched, the more brittle I become, until eventually the pressure is too much. It's broken. I'm broken. Where's the resilience now? When you leave a cult, it's like leaving an abusive relationship. You think leaving would be the best part, but it's often the hardest. When you've been enmeshed with them for so long, and then you finally leave. For many of my colleagues, the pain and confusion was just too much, and they just ran straight back into the familiar arms of the cult, unable to see the truth. And I empathize with them, I really do. But I was not going to let that happen to me again. And this is what I learned. Having an identity made up of one band is not resilience. But having an identity made up of many rubber bands is.
A single individual standing out amongst the crowd who are all going along, who says, no, I won't be part of that. I know that is not the right way. And therefore, he stands out as a unique individual who has reclaimed the part of his personal responsibility. In that moment, at least. That doesn't always follow that will be that way for the rest of the being's life. But the whole point is, it's the beginning of making a decision that has to be reaffirmed to keep that responsibility and not try to give it away. That can only be done through self-respect, as I said last week, which comes from the Latin re meaning again and spectare meaning to look at. We need to take another look at ourselves if we're going to create any real change outside of ourselves. Look in the mirror, because that's where the answer lies. Human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. This is all about the willingness to take a look at ourselves, which is the development of true respect for ourselves, which we cannot give to anyone else until we have it first for ourselves. Respect and responsibility is the answer. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, there are only two mistakes that one can make on the path to truth: not starting and not going all the way.
The linguistic tactics the scammers used were compared to how police may coerce a false confession from a suspect, but could just as well apply to cult indoctrination. They do it incrementally, in a series of small steps that take you farther and farther from what you know to be true. It's not about breaking the will, they were altering the sense of reality. Your perception of reality depends less on the physical things you see than the words you hear. Language empowers cult leaders to create a mini-universe, as Montel puts it, around their followers. The defense of that is not to block out language, but to hear more of it from as many sources as possible. That way, no one person has the power to shape your reality.
Perhaps we can ask the question, why is one person shaping your reality? Or why is multiple people shaping your reality? Are you able to shape your own reality? Well, we see an emphasis here greatly upon education, information, and knowledge, which is a great consensus among all the people who study the nature of cults. There's also the consensus that we should tap into multiple cults or multiple identities, having a flexible identity, having a resilient identity. And the question comes to me is, when we say we're being able to tap in and tap out into what? Our true selves? Wouldn't we always want to be our true selves? We say there's this linguistic uniform. Well, is there something beyond language? Is there a true identity, per se? And you could believe that you are tapping in and out, or thinking you don't need to worry about it at all. And there even is perhaps a scenario for violent intervention, not just non-violent. Of course, I don't encourage that. But it is worth noting that in some cases, really extreme cases with cults, it has been talked about among some of these researchers as well, that they've had to do it, but that they've also been restricted as to when to do it by certain systems that be. Regardless, it's great to see this consensus on how we treat, and not just treat, but prevent cult behavior. But we need to address the elephant in the room. Many people believe that they are in a world surrounded by cults in our everyday lives.
And whichever way you define it, either the more classical or the more modern, I think both are a fair description of what has become of modern culture. Because if you resign yourself to the default social pressures of today and the conventional wisdom of the day and the message of the day, the one that is forcefully imposed by every facet of popular culture, you are likely under the spell of everything we mean by the word cult.
The language of cults, she says, is now everywhere. If you question the business model of a multi-level marketing scheme, well, that's just stinking thinking, a thought-terminating cliche popular with MLMs like Amway. Similarly, when the predictions of QAnon and other conspiracy theorists don't come to pass, followers on social media are told to trust the plan. Jeff Bezos' leadership principles, which include think big and dive deep. Politics is rife with us versus them terminology, so that everyone is either a patriot or a traitor. And fitness centers like SoulCycle or CrossFit use jargon like box, WOD, tapbacks, or DOMs to make membership feel exclusive. Montel argues that as traditional institutions like churches, clubs, and unions have declined in popularity, people are desperate for new ways to feel a sense of belonging, and the majority turn to social media. TikTokers are competing to coin the next trendy phrase like polywork, micro-cheating, or 75 cozy. This online jargon has little functional purpose, other than to create a sense of community amongst the people who know it.
The root of the word culture is the word cult. That's because our cultural fixations and our expressions communicate that which we worship.
Political figure, spiritual leader, celebrity, friend, self-help guru. These lines have become incredibly blurry as of late. 1 in 5 CEOs has been determined to have psychopathic tendencies. So that's quite culty. Not in the same way as, really damaging religious cults, but also, a lot in common, a lot of abuses in common. But it's also very difficult to define religion. Like, scholars have been arguing for so long about what a religion even is.
Yeah. Modern, secular, non-theistic culture is under the delusion that it doesn't worship anything because it doesn't name the thing it worships. Just like members of any stereotypical cult, everyone who is fully enrolled in this one is utterly convinced that they exemplify the antithesis of someone captured by spiritual and psychological manipulation.
I used to think that cults were obvious. Extreme religious groups where people lived in communes and wore funny robes. The kind you see in the movies. But I've since learned that there's many cults that don't fit this sensationalized stereotype, and they can exist in everyday places. Anyone else think it's weird that you literally press a follow button on many of these platforms? Nobody joins a cult on purpose. They join something good. I was being so open-minded that my brain had totally fallen out. Maybe you know someone whose world revolves entirely around their job, or is brainwashed by political extremism, or lost to an online echo chamber. Surge of defensiveness flows through me. If by cult, you mean a group of people committed to transforming and transcending their experience to become conscious creators of the world, that's how cults work. They don't ask for worship outright. It happens slowly, over time, until you can't remember who you were before and you're explaining trauma theory over Christmas dinner to a family who just want their daughter back.
A family that just wants their daughter back. Well, I would say this is a world that simply wants maybe people to be people. Am I too far to say that? I don't know, but how much are we fooling ourselves or fooling other people away from themselves? These are the questions we have to ask. I mean, funny thing enough is that talk there at the end was from a TED Talk. And some TED Talks are straight up banned. Talks that maybe they don't want you to know, which we can argue has some sort of cult-like behavior within itself. One of my favorite articles I read about cults is titled Cult Contradictions, and it goes over many of the ones that we've talked about in this video. Topics such as freedom, truth, criticism, right? Family, the group, scarcity, saving the world, the real you. Yes, they'll even say that this is the real you. So to deceive you into thinking this is your true identity. There's even the concept of bounded choice. Now, bounded choice means that an individual or several individuals have irrational decisions in a context that makes perfect sense to them. And this, in fact, is consistent with their highest aspirations. But unfortunately, they are succumbing to the illusion of choice. They think they have a choice, they think they have a conscience or a will, but in reality, that's merely being played on. Another concept is the sunk cost fallacy. And this fallacy makes us continue a venture or behavior and pursue an inferior alternative simply because we have invested resources previously. I put so much time and effort into this, why would I give it up? And here's a study talking about how neuroscience confirms we buy an emotion and justify with logic, and yet we sell to Mr. Rational and ignore Mr. Intuitive. Here's another chart merely going over the cult behavior again. And you know it's bad when there's a book literally titled Why Cults Are More Addictive Than Donuts. There's also the saying, every accusation is a confession. A person who accuses others of a thing, act, behavior, wrongdoing, while in fact doing that very same thing themselves. Another concept we may know if we want to understand language better is there's actually a word for a remedy to all ills or an answer or solution to all problems or difficulties, and that goes by the word panacea. Now, it's no surprise if you look at comment threads of many of the videos or articles you find online regarding cults, people say things like this: I spent 40 plus years in an abusive family dynamic. After walking away, I realized it was run like a cult by my mother. So yes, families can be cult-like as well. Or even by this video by the doctors, this comment says, government, religion, society in general, people are blind. This comment likes to make the distinction much more clearer between a proper religion or church and a cult. A church says you're welcome anytime, any reason, and while they might encourage you to follow them, they won't be judgmental if you turn away. They want to help you and want you to see the way they do of your own volition. They want you to come back and be a part of their community. A church says, come in. A cult, on the other hand, stifles your free will, tells you not to think for yourself, tells you that they are your only salvation, and shames you if you speak out against them, and they make it impossible, or at least extremely difficult, to leave them and go your own way without them. A cult says, Never leave, no exceptions. Now notice again the emphasis here on language. Here's another comment. If they're telling you not to get an education or not to look at stuff from other ways of living, it's because keeping you ignorant makes you forget you have a choice. So keep learning, folks. I think a good way to judge if it's a cult is how much it costs you to leave. From losing friends or loved ones to literally paying them money, these are real giveaways. The church I went to as a kid, well, you just walk away and no one probably even notices. They didn't even have any contact details for me or my parents or any idea where any of us worked. You might be thinking about all the contracts you have to sign, or maybe even some of the hidden contracts that you didn't sign. Now finally, because we're talking so much about cults, it's worth mentioning there are thousands, probably more than that, videos out there online of people explaining their experience, their personal testimony of leaving a cult or having struggled within a cult. And there are channels like this, Cults to Consciousness, which show these interviews, and they are profound. So without further ado, as you see, people are greatly concerned with the world that we live in and see that there are maybe cult-like elements throughout our entire society. Let's break it down bit by bit, every single thing in our society, with an emphasis on language, the responder, the order follower, the person who is the victim, who may empower the leader, and say identity itself, among many of the concepts that we've talked about. Are you ready? This may upset you, but just as the cult experts talked about, you may want to look at something you don't want to look at.
You make it a crime to teach it in the public schools. Tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools. And tomorrow you may make it a crime to read about it. And soon you may ban books and newspapers. And then you may turn Catholic against Protestant and Protestant against Protestant and try to foist your own religion upon the mind of man. If you can do one, you can do the other. Because fanaticism and ignorance is forever busy and needs feeding. And soon, Your Honor, with banners flying and with drums beating, we'll be marching backward, through the glorious ages of that 16th century, when bigots burned the man who dared bring enlightenment and intelligence to the human mind.